and welcome to Washington Talk. I'm In-jung Cho. 1,000 days after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the war is intensifying and North Korea is getting more involved. Meanwhile, President-elect Donald Trump has expressed interest in shipbuilding cooperation with South Korea. Today, we discuss U.S. cooperation with South Korea under President Trump and how the war in Ukraine affects the Korean Peninsula.
And we're going to turn our country around. We're going to make it so great, so strong, so powerful. We're going to bring it all back.
Well, it's essentially China that now produces about 50% of global shipping, South Korea and Japan.
The party here that continues to escalate this war is Russia. By bringing in another foreign country into the battlefield, by bringing in over 11,000 DPRK soldiers into the fight.
I would expect coming back will be submarine technology and propulsion technology that are coming back.
In the studio with me, Dr. Patrick Cronin, Asia Pacific Security Chair at the Hudson Institute. Dr. Cronin previously served as Senior Director of the Institute for National Strategic Studies at the National Defense University. Also joining us, Mr. Sidney Seiler, Senior Advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Mr. Seiler was a former National Intelligence Officer for North Korea on the National Intelligence Council from 2020 to 2023. Mr. Seiler was the Special Envoy for Six-Party Talks and National Security Council Korea Director during the Obama administration. Mr. Seiler also served as Senior Analyst for U.S. Forces Korea. Mr. Seiler has worked on North Korea issues for over 40 years. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, Dr. Cronin, North Korea is becoming more involved in the Ukraine war. South Korea's National Intelligence Service told lawmakers that there are about 11,000 North Korean troops in the Kursk regions, with them attached to the naval and air units, and some have already begun fighting on the front lines. How is North Korea contributing to Russia's capabilities in the war and impacting the overall war in Ukraine?
Well, you're certainly right. They've gone from providing munitions to providing artillery and rockets to providing troops. And some of those troops are now dead and some are injured. And so that's helping Russia wage this war in Kursk in particular, because Russia wants to regain not just Russian territory, but as much territory as possible before possible serious negotiations that could lead to a ceasefire. What we're wondering is what's North Korea getting in exchange, and we can talk about that.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Seiler, Dmytro Ponomarenko, Ukraine's ambassador to South Korea, told VOA in an exclusive interview that North Korea having this direct combat experience would increase the instability and threat level on the Korean Peninsula. How do you think North Korean soldiers getting more accustomed to the weapons in use and the war tactics, how would that change North Korea's strategy and tactics against South Korea?
I think above all else, there's a great propaganda value domestically, while avoiding direct acknowledgement that troops have been sent there. Kim Jong-un most recently, in talking to senior military and military industry officials, has talked about how now the North is playing a major role in international affairs, an indirect reference to this. So I think the fact that Kim has shown a willingness to have KPA soldiers fight and die even, speaks also to perhaps his calculus on what he might do vis-a-vis South Korea. It would be hard to project 10,000 troops battlefield experience as having a significant impact on a 1.x million man KPA. But that said, there's other less tangible benefits to having those troops over there and bringing back that battlefield experience.
And Dr. Cronin, Admiral Samuel Paparo, the commander of the U.S. Indo-PACOM, said that he expects Russia to provide North Korea with submarine technology and propulsion technology in exchange for the troop deployment. How much of a threat is this to South Korea and the United States, combining that submarine technology with North Korea's rapidly advancing missile technology?
Well, North Korea has been very ambitious about building up a big arsenal of weapons of mass destruction, including sea-based weapons. Even their long-range missiles, though, have not seen the physical testing of a reentry vehicle. So I think Admiral Paparo said a couple of things this week that we do expect that North Korea will be certainly asking for some of these key technologies, for submarine technologies, for reentry vehicles. Whether Russia provides them still remains to be seen. But it will obviously change the balance of military power to some extent. But I believe also South Korea, Japan, the United States will be able to respond and deter whatever North Korea develops because of Russian technology.
If North Korea gets that submarine technology from Russia, that could change the whole strategic calculus because it could sneak to near the United States and strike the United States with nuclear weapons. And in that such circumstances, would U.S. extended deterrence over South Korea hold?
Well, I've been involved in submarine programs for a long time, and they take decades to develop. You have to have a fleet of submarines to keep one out on station. It takes a lot of work. So North Korea has a long way to go to build up a serious submarine capability that could fire longer range missiles.
You say it's going to take a long time, but even if it takes a long time, that time could come when North Korea has that submarine capability. And my question was, would U.S. nuclear umbrella hold over South Korea under such circumstances?
Well, the U.S. nuclear umbrella is strong, and it will continue to be strong because we have more than 5,000 nuclear weapons, and no country can start a war against our allies without fearing that we may bring them to bear. It is part of our declaratory policy, our nuclear posture. There's going to be a new nuclear posture statement put out next year. Let's wait to see what happens there. Your question, though, is, okay, does extended deterrence erode in the face of both new military capabilities and Russia's saber rattling on nuclear weapons, thinking that maybe we're going to cross the nuclear taboo here, maybe North Korea will follow suit? Of course, those things erode extended deterrence confidence. But I think I would argue that it doesn't actually erode real deterrence. And I think Kim Jong-un, if he's ever going to start a war, he's going to be thinking about real deterrence, not whether the public is believing it or not.
Yeah, this is a dangerous intersection of North Korea's propaganda, which without doubt is at some point going to portray a nuclear submarine capable of launching nuclear missiles and capable of hiding and a second strike. Everything that, your worst nightmare is about this capability for propaganda purposes and amateur analysis that'll actually buy into that. But as Patrick noted here, in terms of the capabilities posed by even a Russia-enabled brand new North Korea nuclear submarine, it will be years before they would have a viable force by our standards.
And to just underscore the real strategy here. The real strategy for Kim Jong-un is to create a second strike capability so that you cannot decapitate the North Korean regime. We're going to have an ability to respond that will be secure. That's really what Kim has been trying to do. He's trying to secure the regime. Survival is still the key, and these nuclear weapons are first and foremost stop intervention, and then really stop intervention by having a second strike capability. Right. He's using these for coercive purposes and propagandistic purposes, but only if we let him.
Exactly.
And Mr. Seiler, the Biden administration allowed Ukraine to use American ATACMS to strike deep into Russia. The United States kept limits on that, thinking that that could be considered as a major provocation by Russia. Do you think North Korea's deployment of troops was a major catalyst for this decision? And is this a warning against North Korea somehow, that North Korea should stop getting involved deeper and deeper?
I think it's more of a warning, if anything, to Vladimir Putin. I think the decision was obviously influenced by the escalation of conflict that the dispatch of DPRK soldiers represent more than it is a new dimension of North Korea that we need to punish. And I'm certain, the use of ATACMS in Russia has been a topic of discussion even before the North Koreans intervened. And I think as probably a list of options was looked at, this was one of the most immediate, easiest to do, and one that would get Moscow's attention. I don't know there's particularly any type of signaling to North Korea.
I want to segue to the Trump coming into office. Mr. Seiler, many predict that the second Trump administration will demand greater host nation support from South Korea because the first Trump administration even hinted at the troop withdrawal. Some Koreans see this as a time for South Korea to secure nuclear latency, to change the civilian nuclear agreement, the 123 agreement, for South Korea to be able to reprocess spent fuel rods or enrich uranium, or get a U.S. green light to get a nuclear-powered submarine, or get U.S. nuclear tactical weapons redeployed to South Korea. Are these some of the viable agenda that could be put on the table with the second Trump administration?
I'm glad to hear that thinking is going on, because at a certain level, Donald Trump is a deal maker. And I think when you deal with somebody like him, he's an ideational thinker. He'll say things out loud. He looks at Korea. He sees an ally. He sees an ally that's got pretty significant trade deficit, with whom we have a significant trade deficit. And we see an ally that's below that 3% magical mark of defense spending as a percentage of GDP. So, of course, for Donald Trump, all of these things will be in play. And how the Republic of Korea addresses each of those is, to have that ready answer. Why are you an important ally? Why are your contributions potentially to a scenario on China important to us? Why don't you pay more on defense? And what is the value that you're getting out of U.S. forces there? And could we make adjustments that maybe if you had, even latent nuclear capabilities, you could take more responsibility for your defense. This is a period that I think all these questions that traditionally we've laid aside in support of your classic model of the alliance need to be discussed. And, I think that you're right. A lot of Koreans are asking whether that, I think they're worst case scenarioing some of the things that might unfold under Donald Trump. I do believe that a majority of at least your security elite are opposed to taking the nuclear path for now, when you look at all the cost involved. But all these issues, should be on the table, because I do believe, the one unknown factor, maybe Patrick, you would want to comment on this, that I struggle with is, what is the president-elect's view on proliferation? Is he necessarily one who would be inclined to say, holy cow, we've got 9 now and we want no more? Or why doesn't South Korea have nuclear weapons? That might make sense.
U.S. post-World War II policy has been enshrined in the creation of this nuclear non-proliferation regime that privileged the permanent 5 nuclear powers, but then allowed up to 9 so far, but now Iran may be moving toward to be the 10th. And I think that is a constraint on the Trump administration's thinking, but Trump is not constrained by what's happened before. He's thinking of this fresh as, what's in the best interest right now for America? What's realistic for our ability to be able to compete with China, because China is the only large challenge on the horizon. And with allies like South Korea, how do we drive a new bargain? And I think, Sid was hinting at that on the nuclear side. All things need to be on the table. We need to at least jointly study the options and how they contribute to extended deterrence and reassurance of our ally. But in exchange, how is South Korea leaning forward in its Asia pivotal state role, especially with dealing with China competition issues on technology, shipbuilding, on chips, on the economy and trade, things that we really need to be able to ensure that China doesn't roll over the region and roll over the world with sort of Communist Party-led, claiming to be fair traders, but in reality favoring Chinese mercantilism.
Any nuclear discussion between South Korea and the United States, wouldn't Japan also closely watch and want to follow South Korea? Whatever latency that South Korea gets, wouldn't Japan also want that? Shouldn't South Korea also think about that Japan element when talking to the United States about nuclear?
I mean, most of my Japanese interlocutors say that United States we're too fast and loose with the assessment that if South Korea got nuclear capabilities, Japan would immediately jump on board. There's still the legacy of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There's still a lot of anti-nuclear sentiment in the Japanese public.
Right.
You follow this much closer.
And so that's the paradox, right? Japan already has nuclear latency. They've already
Right.
studied this closely, but they don't want nuclear weapons.
Right.
They're at the forefront of the nuclear nonproliferation movement. In the political, if we put it up for a referendum in Japan, it would fail in terms of trying to go nuclear, whereas in public opinion, Korea is the opposite. I think the question here, though, is we do need Japan and Korea and the United States all in some kind of extended deterrence dialogue. It can be separate from the nuclear consultative group that's been built with South Korea, but I think that would be what the Trump administration should pursue with Prime Minister Ishiba and President Yoon.
Dr. Cronin, in a phone conversation with President Yoon Suk-yeol, President Trump noted South Korea's success in shipbuilding and ship maintenance and said he looked forward to discussing with South Korea how South Korea can help with U.S. shipbuilding industry. Couldn't South Korea spin on President Trump's transactional approach and use this opportunity as a time for South Korea to get something in return from President Trump?
Well, I think the recent purchase of the Philadelphia port by Hanwha was not lost on President Trump when Philadelphia it was part of the Pennsylvania fight over the election. And I think in addition to that, he's talking to a lot of people, President Trump, elect Trump, about the Navy and keeping our ships forward. So we need the maintenance, repair, and overhaul capabilities that Korea has, or that Korea could invest in at Subic Bay, for instance, for commercial overhaul and shipbuilding. And we need Korea to build the kind of LNG carriers that will support Trump's energy policy, because Trump wants to leverage America's energy independence for that economic competition with China. Korea needs energy. Korea is the best builder of LNG carriers. That's a win-win-win situation here for Korea and the United States, and for energy and for the alliance. So I think this was a great conversation, but it's just the start of the conversation. It's going to be this larger bargain. It's on the table now, but it's a real positive thing to be thinking about, rather than thinking about, hey, you didn't pay enough on the special measures agreement you just rushed through with the Biden administration. That's now not the discussion. So this is a very healthy beginning. Koreans are winning the real competition. They're keeping ahead of the Joneses next door in Japan. I think the reality is that Japan set the gold standard of how to deal with Trump in his first term. But Shinzo Abe is no longer alive. I'm not even sure that Prime Minister Abe, if he were alive, could do what he did then today, because Trump wants to put together his plan for the America First policies, and then he wants to work with allies and drive new bargains. Prime Minister Ishiba, though, to answer your question, called and was trying to set up an early meeting on the margins of one of the summits. Maybe he could come down or come up, I guess, to Mar-a-Lago. And that was nixed by the Trump campaign or transition team. And I think that was a setback, a physical setback, a visible setback for Japan. So Korea's done the right thing, and they're working very hard. Japan is playing catch-up, surprisingly, on this issue. And that's partly reflective of the fact that Japan's domestic politics have shifted, and Prime Minister Ishiba is fighting for his minority coalition.
So substance, in fact, substance. So we have the symbolism.
Yes.
Then we have the substance, and I think back, for example, two primary examples for points of comparison: the initial interaction between President Bush and President Kim Dae-jung, which did not go well, and then the environment under which Donald Trump first met, as it were, Moon Jae-in. And when you read the readout, admittedly, it's from the presidential office, but so they obviously wanted to put a good spin on it. But what I saw were two leaders that had shared interests and shared views, especially on North Korea, and who had the appearance of being able to naturally work on these strategic issues, and I would say even by extension China at some point, in a way that will be encouraging to Donald Trump and will incentivize him to engaging with President Yoon more than simply making decisions that impact the peninsula without any type of consultation.
During the summit trip between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, former President Moon Jae-in didn't have any influence over that, but given that United States and South Korea have much closer ties at this point, and President Yoon Suk-yeol has prioritizes the United States in many ways in his diplomacy, do you think President Yoon may have more influence over possible Trump-Kim symmetry in the future?
So actually, South Koreans actively acted as mediators during the Trump administration. So it would be kind of wrong to say that they had no influence. But if you were to say that they could not dictate what type of approach Donald Trump took at that time, that may be a fair assessment. Inevitably, when you try to kick off this diplomacy, one actor will move in a way that makes their partners uncomfortable. It happens every time the Japanese start to talk abductee issues or when there's a breakthrough in North-South dialogue. This fear of Korea passing, this 통미봉남 complex, is one that I think should be part of the past, and instead there should be some confidence that approached the right way, President Trump will see President Yoon as a partner for carrying out what he may have in mind in terms of whatever approach he makes to North Korea. For now, Kim Jong-un, of course, refuses any types of talk with us, which makes it very crucial that the conversation between Donald Trump and President Yoon is one of how do we maintain deterrence, how do we maintain pressure, how do we coax North Korea back to the table.
And Mr. Seiler, senior national security positions being filled by President Trump, including Senator Marco Rubio, have hawkish views on North Korea. Do you think compared to the first Trump administration, the second Trump administration senior officials may be less friendly view regarding North Korea, do you think?
I think, well, first of all, they're informed by the experience of decades. Some people like Senator Rubio have been watching this very closely. But Donald Trump and then all of his closest aides remember what happened in Hanoi, how ill-prepared Kim Jong-un was and how uninterested in making a deal and moving forward with the United States Kim Jong-un demonstrated during the subsequent few years of the Trump 1 term. So there's that experience behind them. They've watched the hundreds of missile launches that have taken place. And they see the assessments that Kim Jong-un over and over states, and including that statement overnight, where he says, we've done all the diplomacy that we need to do with the United States. They understand that Kim Jong-un is fundamentally not interested in talking about his nuclear program. So I think the hawkishness is not because previously they were more friendly people and now the new team's hawkish. I think it's just a cumulative lessons learned over time.
And Dr. Cronin, during the first Trump term, it was very evident that President Trump made the call ultimately. It is the same with any U.S. presidents, but especially with President Trump. So despite the bipartisan support for joint exercises or deployment of strategic assets to South Korea, isn't there a chance that President Trump may put the brakes to that? And wouldn't Kim Jong-un also maybe link that, the exercises and the deployment of strategic assets, with possible talks with Washington?
Well, President-elect Trump, as he enters his second term, is going to have to weigh trying to undo things that were done during Biden's watch, like the deployment of regular strategic assets that South Korea requested for extended deterrence, or stepping up and regularizing the large-scale exercises again, versus the reality of what he's went through the first term with North Korea negotiations not succeeding and his other priorities. And I think the most important thing here will be communication at the top level, as you point out. It's going to be President Yoon and President Trump. If they can communicate and talk about shipbuilding and talk about economic competition with China, Korea is going to be just fine. There may be adjustments and changes on troops, on the special measures, on the OPCON issue, on other issues, strategic assets. All of those things are potentially things that could be modified, but I don't think there's a fundamental change here. I think it'll be done in the context of a healthy, strong alliance. My concern will be what happens after President Yoon, frankly, because then we're in an unknown situation. I think there's bound to be uncertainty about Trump because Trump makes those calls and Trump is less constrained than most presidents would be. But I think the top level rapport with the South Korean president and the conservative South Korean president is going to be strong and decisive right now in forging a stronger alliance at the moment.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Mr. Seiler, Dr. Cronin, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. We'll be back here next week with U.S. experts to discuss the two Koreas and the region right here from Washington.